Hey friends, welcome back. Have you ever noticed how quickly your mood can change, not because something terrible happened, but because someone interrupted your plans? You finally sit down after a long day and someone calls. You're trying to finish a project and a coworker walks into your office. You're headed out the door and your child asks for help. You sit to enjoy a quiet evening and your spouse needs something. Nothing catastrophic happened, nothing sinful happened. So why do we become irritated so quickly? At first glance, C.S. Lewis's 21st letter appears to be about interruptions and schedules, but Lewis is aiming at something much deeper than that. This isn't really a letter about time. It's a letter about ownership and stewardship. Time is simply the easiest way to expose what we believe belongs to us. In letter 21, Screwtape reveals one of hell's wildly effective strategies, not making Christians busy, but convincing them that their time belongs to them in the first place. Let's get into it. One of the first things Screwtape tells Wormwood in this letter is something we've seen repeatedly throughout this series. Before you can corrupt a person's behavior, you first have to corrupt their thinking. That's how temptation usually works. Sin rarely begins with an action, it begins with a lie about God, a lie about ourselves, or a lie about reality. Jesus called Satan the father of lies. Because once someone believes the wrong thing, the wrong emotions, and eventually the wrong actions often follow naturally. Lewis says before hell launches a moral attack, it first clouds the mind, and that's exactly what happens here. Lewis says something incredibly insightful. People don't become angry simply because bad things happen. They become angry when they believe something that belonged to them has been unfairly taken away. Think about how often this happens. Someone cuts you off in traffic, someone keeps you waiting, your phone rings at the worst possible moment, your child interrupts your favorite TV show, a customer won't stop talking, a neighbor catches you while you're mowing. None of those things are particularly difficult. The conversation usually isn't unbearable. The child isn't asking the impossible. The phone call only lasts 5 minutes, so why does the irritation rise so quickly? Because somewhere underneath it all is an assumption. That was my time. Lewis says that's the real issue. The interruption isn't the enemy, the belief underneath the interruption is. Screwtape tells Wormwood, protect this assumption at all costs. My time is my own. What a powerful sentence. Because most of us have probably said some version of it this week. I need some me time. This is my evening. They've ruined my plans. They've wasted my afternoon. Notice how naturally those words come out. But of course, Scripture paints a different picture. Psalm 24 says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, you are not your own, for you were bought with a price. James reminds us that we don't even know what tomorrow will bring. Everything we have, our money, our talents, our families, our homes, our health, our opportunities, even our next breath, is a gift from God. Not something we've earned, not something we own, something we've been entrusted with. We are stewards, not owners. That doesn't mean God doesn't graciously give us things to enjoy. He absolutely does. But Scripture consistently reminds us that everything we possess, including our time, has been entrusted to us by its rightful owner. One of the things that struck me while reading this letter was how often Jesus was interrupted, almost constantly. He would withdraw to pray, and crowds would find him. He would be teaching, and parents would bring children to him. He would be on his way to heal one person, and another person would stop him. Think about Jairus. Jesus is hurrying to the home of a 12-year-old girl who is dying. Then in the middle of that urgent mission, a woman who had been suffering from chronic bleeding for 12 years reaches out and touches his garment. By every human standard, that's an interruption. Or think about blind Bartimaeus calling out from the roadside, or Nicodemus arriving after dark, or the countless people who interrupted meals, conversations, and even his attempts to find solitude. Yet Jesus never responded as though people were stealing something from him. In fact, many of those interruptions became some of his greatest moments in ministry. Why? Because unlike us, Jesus never viewed interruptions as theft, because his life was already fully surrendered to the Father's will. Listen to how consistently he describes his mission. In John 4:34, Jesus says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. In John 5:30, he says, I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. In John 6:38, he declares, I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And then in the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the cross itself, Jesus prays in Luke 22, verse 42, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. This was the pattern of his entire earthly life. Jesus certainly had the right to his time. After all, as the eternal Son of God, all things belong to him. John writes, all things were made through him. Paul declares, by him all things were created through him and for him, and in him all things hold together. Everything belongs to Christ. And yet, during his earthly ministry, he never treated his human schedule as something that had to be protected. Instead, he willingly submitted every hour, every conversation, every delay, every interruption to the Father's purposes. That's why interruptions so often became divine appointments. The people everyone else viewed as inconveniences, Jesus saw as souls. And I have to wonder, how many divine appointments have I missed because I was too busy defending my schedule? Screwtape tells Wormwood, don't let the patient think about this, because if the Christian actually examined the assumption, it would fall apart. That's how so many lies survive, not because they're strong, but because they're never examined. Think about the questions Satan doesn't want us asking. Why am I irritated right now? What expectation was just violated? What exactly do I believe was stolen? Who does my time actually belong to? Who owns this day? Those are dangerous questions for the enemy, because they expose what we're actually worshiping. If I'm furious that someone interrupted my plans, perhaps the problem isn't simply my temper. Perhaps I've been worshiping my schedule without even realizing it. Remember that song from Psalms that you likely sang as a kid in Sunday school? This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. Lewis broadens the conversation beyond time. He points out how casually we say, my money, my house, my career, my reputation, my rights, my body, my future, my church, my ministry, my children. Now, there's nothing wrong with using the word my. The Bible does that too. But Lewis says Satan works to subtly change what we mean by it. He wants us to confuse stewardship with absolute ownership. There's a world of difference between saying my wife because God has entrusted me to love and serve her, and saying my wife as though she were my possession. There's a difference between my house and believing that no one has the right to inconvenience me there. There's a difference between my time and believing God owes me uninterrupted comfort. The enemy wants to flatten out all of those meanings into one simple assumption. It's mine. Lewis ends with a striking point. He says that in the end, either Satan or God will say mine over everything that exists. But there's a critical difference. Satan says mine through conquest. God says mine because he created it. Everything already belongs to him. The question has never been ownership. The question is surrender. Will we gladly acknowledge today what has always been true? That our lives, our days, our possessions, our opportunities, our relationships, our very selves belong to God? Maybe the next time someone interrupts your plans, instead of immediately asking, why are they wasting my time, ask a different question. Lord, what are you doing through me with your time? Because if Jesus willingly surrendered every moment of his earthly life to accomplish the Father's will, even to the point of death on a cross, then surely I can surrender this interrupted afternoon. That one question might completely change how you see the interruptions, because the greatest evidence that we've surrendered our lives to Christ isn't how we behave when everything goes according to plan. It's how we respond when God lovingly rearranges the plan. Thanks so much for watching. If this episode encouraged you, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel and share it with someone who might need it. Next time we'll continue our journey through the Screwtape Letters and discover a few things that send Screwtape into a rage. Grace and peace, friends. See you then.